Bienvenidos de regreso. Y bueno, solo como recordar.
Very well, welcome back. Just as a reminder, please put your cell phones on vibrate mode, silent mode. And I would like to hand the floor to our next speaker, Lisa Schole from the Evolve Consulting Group, who will present a research group in sorghum and in pet food. Lisa graduate from Lincoln, Nebraska with a license degree in animal science, master's degree, and she has around 15 years of experience in the food industry for pets, specializing in the development of finished products and innovative prime raw material. She's co-proprietary of Forbes Consulting Group and works with food for pets and raw material from different angles and sizes. A fine definition of CO.
Mrs. Skong has also designed research studies to classify different ingredients. She has coordinated different tests and developed different feed for animals. And she has also provided different recommendations for pet feed companies with regards to the composition of those different ingredients. Lisa, it's quite a pleasure to have you with us. And
first off, I want to back from coffee break, but also thank the U.S. Grains Council for having me. Excited to talk to you guys a little bit about pet food. I think it's really important as we kind of frame this up to shift gears. Pet food is not about rate of gain. It's not about how fast you can get there, and it's not about feed costs, right? We are all about longevity, health, safety, and honestly feeding them very, very similar to the way we would feed ourselves. So if we kind of shift our mind away from costs and rate of gain, we can really kind of dive into pet food and the way we look at pet food. So just real quick, I know gave a quick overview of my background, but I'm a ruminant nutritionist by trade, so I had to shift my mindset when I joined the pet food world. So it is possible to get there. We still farm in northeast Nebraska, raise a lot of corn and soybeans, so a lot of this application goes back home for me as well. So again, I want to start with a presentation overview. Really, I want to talk about the size of the prize because a lot of people don't fully understand or appreciate pet food and how big that market really is. I want to talk about barley, sorghum, and then we're going to kind of just wrap all that up into some applications and pull it back together because pet food comes in a variety of different forms, and the form of that ingredient really matters for which application you're looking at putting it into. So again, I want to thank earlier speakers this morning. They have framed up my topic very, very well. So we're going to combine a lot of what we've already heard and kind of put that into that pet food spin. So the current pet food market, we're going to look at 2020 numbers. It's 9.4 million metric tons of pet food in North America alone. When you put that globally, 29 million metric tons of pet food. Dry dog still accounts for the largest percentage, and dry extruded dog food. So as we really talk forms, extruded is still the biggest form. It's not the fastest growing form anymore, but it is still the biggest form of pet food out there. But dry dog accounts for 41.5% of that 29 million metric tons. Growth is one of those industries that we continue to see growth even in times when there doesn't seem to be growth to be found. Annually, we're seeing about 5% year over year growth. So that comes both in additional animals, but also in different products. So some of the growth, really, we can attribute back kind of a big jump to what we call pandemic pets. A lot of us were home more than we usually were home, spent a lot of extra time in our houses, and we decided we didn't really like being there by ourselves. So we got a friend, and that happened to come with 4 legs, right? So a lot of us got dogs or cats. Maybe some of you got fish, but most people got a dog or a cat, right? And so we see a big spike in numbers due to these, what we call pandemic pets. Pet ownership is continuing to grow across all ages, but we are seeing the biggest gain in those 16 to 34-year-olds. We call them the millennials, the Gen Zs. They are choosing to get a pet instead of have a family, instead of get married. They're having dogs and cats, and they're treating them like they are their firstborn. So globally, if we switch from volume to revenue, it is expected to reach 140 billion by 2030. And here in the next slide, I'll talk about where we are now, but it is expected to reach 140 billion. So just really let that soak in. So currently, oh, sorry, you told me it would take a second. If we did, we're looking at 2020, right? Just over 40 billion US dollars. So we're saying in the next 10 years, we're gonna add $100 billion to that number. So the growth of the pet food industry is huge. So again, looking at it in kilograms, million kilograms, I want to highlight 2020 again. You're going to see this line is fairly linear up. If you look at 2020, there's a weird spike, right? So again, some of this goes to the pandemic pets. Some of this I would also attribute to, I'm not sure how it was for all of you, but in the United States during the pandemic, when you went to the store, if they had what you wanted, you didn't get one, you didn't get two, you may have chose to buy 6 because everybody was afraid that those products may not be there, right? Everything was gonna be unavailable. So when you found it, people bought it and they actually were borderline hoarding products. So you're seeing a big jump there in 2020. 2021, those numbers are falling off. A little bit of that is due to the fact that people hoarded in 2020, but it's also due to some serious supply issues, right? There was production issues, there was raw material issues, there was just a lot of issues in actually producing pet food. So again, you can see the upward trends of millions of kilograms that's projected to continue to go. I kind of want to end on the current pet food market with just this global look. So the darker the color, the higher the current pet food sales are, right? So it's no hidden secret that the United States makes up a large chunk of current pet food volume. But what I really, really want to highlight is those lighter colored countries. Those are those emerging markets. That's where this $100 billion of growth is going to be coming from. The United States is going to continue to have growth, but we're already in a place that is very high, right? North America is accounting for 1/3 of that total pet food volume. So that growth is coming from these emerging markets. So if we switch over, I want to switch into barley and talk barley first. When we talk ingredients in the pet food world, we always talk AAFCO. So AAFCO is the American Association of Feed Control Officials, and they provide our quote-unquote rules, right, for making pet food. They provide ingredient definitions, they provide some of the minimum requirements for dogs and cats. So knowing AAFCO is really helpful for pet food, but in order to be used, you need to have an AAFCO definition. So one of the first hurdles of getting into pet food is having an AAFCO definition. So barley is defined as is a variety of barley co-products, which is huge. It opens those doors. Barley has been used in pet food for years in the States. It's very, very well researched. So I have a lot of data I can present you on barley and the way barley can be used. Real quick, I just kind of want to throw up how barley compares to, some of these other sources here. So barley is going to be just a touch higher in protein than the majority of our usual carb sources, and just a touch higher in fat. But overall, what barley is being used for is not its protein and fat fraction. It's being used for carbohydrates. So, but its nutritional profile is comparable to that of those other carb sources that you'll be replacing. So, barley has one of the highest fiber contents of all the grain in its raw and native form, which is important for pet food. When we think of fiber for pets, it's needed. It's needed for stool quality purposes. I know this morning in the aquaculture talk, there's not a lot of concern on the stool quality of your fish. There is a lot of importance on the stool quality of your dog or cat, because people have to pick it up or they have to scoop it. So with that said, though, the hull that is on that barley is very tough, very vigorous, and honestly, it doesn't perform well in pet food. It makes kibbles that don't properly expand. They're not able to hold together. It doesn't let it have that elasticity. And it also kind of provides weird little, I don't know, almost like shards that protrude out of the side of the kibble. So barley in its whole form is not typically what is used in pet food. Clipped barley is a very common ingredient that is used in pet food. And that has that hull clipped off, so it's taking off that pointy part, and that seed is going to be cut to a uniform length. Dehulled barley has the hull completely removed, and it gets you a crude fiber around 5%. So clipped and dehulled are the most common forms of barley that are used in dry extruded pet food. Pearl barley is going to have that hull and the bran removed. And pearl barley is also used in pet food, but it's usually used in a couple of the different applications. It can be used in a lightly cooked, which I'll get into in a while. It also has less gluten if it's ground into a flour, which allows it can be used in treats, but you have to be very careful if you're doing a diet that's all barley flour to hold the treat together. So again, these numbers that I'm putting up here are slightly higher than the ones on that first table. These are my numbers that I've got in my own Concept 5, my formulation software. So when I'm formulating with barley, these are the values that I'm using. Barley is high in water-soluble vitamin B niacin, so that is something that we can account for. And there is research out there that supports that it survives through extrusion. Not all of it, but there's degradation models that allow you to account for some of that B vitamin when you are formulating. So overall, the nutrient digestibility is similar to other grains. And again, when I say other grains, I'm referencing those grains that was on that first table. So your corn, your wheat, your soy. But again, when we go and we really talk about barley and pet food, when I'm really formulating with barley, I'm formulating with it for its carb. I need it to hold my kibble together. I need that starch. I need that elasticity that it's providing coming off of the extruder. So barley has a total starch content that is much lower than that of other grains. It's only 45 to 70%, depending on kind of the barley and the form. And that ranges from 80 to 95% for your corn, your rice, your sorghum. But with that said, that total starch digestibility is very comparable to those other grains. So for certain diets that are looking for a lower starch content, barley is a really, really good option because it's equally as digestible, but it has less starch coming in with it. Again, these next two, I'm going to kind of combine this with the next slide, but it has the lowest fraction of rapidly digestible starch and the highest fraction of slowly digestible starch. So again, not a ton of starch, but what is in there is slowly digestible. That becomes important. I know it was referenced in our last presentation that that can be good for obese and potentially diabetic animals, and that is absolutely the case. And that combined with the beta-glucans that can be, what did you say, as high as 30% in some kinds of barley. So that fibrous water-soluble polysaccharide will actually help to increase the viscosity through the lumen and slows that transition through and slows the digestion. Again, this has an impact on your glucose metabolism. So dogs and cats that have been fed diets with a high barley content, and by high, I'm talking in the range of about 25%, they have lower peak blood glucose, and their insulin response was diminished. The response was likely due to the slowed passage rate of the slower starch digestion. So again, it's an excellent carb source when it comes to overweight and or diabetic pets. Again, the inclusion rate usually around that 25%.
Esa tasa de inclusión sería más o menos alrededor.
High as 40. So again, just a quick overview of ileum digestion in dogs for these different carbohydrate types. If we look at barley, it is very similar to that of these other carb, I was going to say grain, but I have potato on there, so other carb sources, making it a great choice for pet food. So again, barley used in pet food, I alluded a little bit to the different forms. Extrusion is what I've really focused on because that's what the research out there is really been focused on. It is great at helping to provide that expanded kibble that looks nice coming off the die. It also binds really, really well. So nobody wants to open their bag of dog food and have a bunch of crumbs in the bottom. That is a complaint you will get. So barley really helps to hold that kibble together. When we talk lightly cooked, again, this is probably the fastest growing market right now in the United States. Lightly cooked is, basically a home cooked diet that somebody happens to prepare for you. You go online, you put in your dog's name. My dog is Hattie. She weighs 78 pounds. She's a black lab. She's got an allergy to chicken. And they basically make a diet recommendation for you. And she needs to eat, I feed her twice a day, so they're going to go ahead and break her meals into 2 a day. They're going to cook them, freeze them, and once a week they ship to my door. Right? So not economical, not even really that practical in all honesty, because if you have a Hattie at your house that weighs close to 80 pounds, you need $8 to $12 a day to feed her dog food. So Hattie's not getting mail ordered food at the current time at my house. But this is growing and a lot of people are feeding it like a topper, right? Or it's a treat, it's your dog's birthday. These type of things are really, really growing. But barley is used in this type of application. It's typically your pearled barley, right? They want to see that appearance of that barley, and it needs to be cooked first because the way that cooking process works and the way you want to have a little moisture and gravy left at the end, if you don't cook the barley first, it will absorb all of that and you kind of get this dry, weird paste that comes versus this really nice looking, fresh, stew looking dog food like maybe you made in your kitchen. So, it's also used in treats. Again, barley flour, and I referenced a little bit around the binding. You have to make sure you're using the right combination of ingredients. If you're going with a high barley flour, it is not a 1-to-1 sub for wheat flour. The gluten content of the wheat makes it such a better binder. But there are other ingredients that you can pair it with that allow you to move away from wheat and use a high inclusion of barley. Sprouted barley is another one that's used in treats. It is also being used in some dry foods, very low inclusion levels, but again, to get that benefits that come from the sprout, people are using sprouted barley. Again, a little bit different, but barley grass is used as a digestion aid, and it is being used in a lot of supplements. Again, it's a different form, different type, but it just kind of goes to show there are forms that it can be used in. So if you can find a way to make it play in any of these markets, it's really good. So the key takeaways from barley is it's abundant and it's available. Most years it's abundant and it's available. It is very price friendly, right, when it comes to pet food, so people like to use it. And it's functional in many forms because it comes in many forms, right? The barley industry is very well developed, and they have worked really hard to make sure it's available in the forms you need it. Not every pet food manufacturer has the capability of milling, so some need it to come as a flour, right? Some do have a hammer mill that they're able to grind that themselves, but making it a one-size-fits-all is a limitation typically in the pet food industry, so having the different forms available is a really, really big positive for barley. Again, cost-effective. There is a ton of research on dog and cat that support the nutritional profile, the digestibility, the palatability, the stool quality, and it is an excellent carb source to be used. So the research supports barley's use, and it has been used. It's tried and true. Again, talking about the slow digestible starch and those beta-glucans, there are some kind of what I would call niche markets or your vet diets where this becomes a really good option to put this in. Again, earlier it was referenced on barley protein concentrate. I actually hadn't put that in my slides just because the product has not officially launched. On the pet food side of barley protein concentrate, we actually helped Schole do the research. So the palatability, the stool quality, the formulation, the barley protein concentrate was in those diets at 25%, and there was zero negative impact. So we're currently in the process of carrying out a cat TAS study to prove out that it is going to be safe all the way through, and as soon as that happens, the AFCO definition will get updated for it to be able to be used in pets. So barley protein concentrate, I think, could be a really, really exciting ingredient, and I hope it's ready for 2023. So if we switch over to sorghum, there is a lot less to be said on sorghum. It was referenced earlier this morning. There's just not near as much research on sorghum. The Sorghum Checkoff has been doing a really, really good job of trying to put out some new research, and that is coming. But it's out there, but it's slow for implementation, right, into pet food because sorghum seems to carry some negative connotations, whether those are true or not. Most have been proven to be not, but they're still out there. And we all know Dr. Google, and he tends to trump science. And so until we can fix Dr. Google with better science, sorghum has a bit of an uphill battle still. But it is AFCO defined, right? So that checks the first box for use in pet food. And it is being used in pet food. Again, I can kind of fly through these because I feel like this was hit this morning. But sorghum originates from Northeast Africa and Asia. It's a close cousin to millet and sugarcane. Perennial grass, commonly grown as an annual crop, fairly drought tolerant. I grew up in southeast Nebraska, and we grew sorghum every year. Rotated it with soybeans. That was the crop rotation until corn genetics continued to get better. Approximately 60 million tons is produced annually, so there's plenty out there to be used if you want to use it. a real quick kind of throwing up the nutritional profile again, it compares very, very well to these other carb sources. And the reason I keep comparing back to these carb sources is pet food, tends to use 20 to 25% meat or a meat meal. It's going to have 25 to 50% of a carb source, usually split between a couple different options. So you need to know what you're replacing, right? Once you get into a pet food bag, you're typically in, right? It takes a long time to get in, but once you're on the bag and you're printed, bags don't typically change for 12, 18, maybe even longer months. So once you're in, you're in. So it's good to know what you're competing with. So sorghum is about 75% starch. It has a slow digestible starch. There's some research that the sorghum checkoff has done to show in both dogs and cats that is true. So you can, just like barley has the ability to potentially be used for those diabetic or overweight pets, sorghum could have those same applications. So if you were able to actually pair up barley and sorghum, it would be a really good diabetic overweight formulation. Again, looking at the ileum digestion within dogs of sorghum, we are very, very similar to these other carb sources I keep comparing back to. So all of this goes to show that sorghum is a good option in the diet. We just need more people to decide it's a good option and to actually use it. So I kind of want to shift gears and talk about superfoods, which seems like a kind of an odd thing. But when we talk pet food and we talk pet food marketing, we don't market pet food the same way we market livestock feed, right? People don't go into your local livestock store and say, tell me which of these products is going to make my cattle's coat shiny. That's not something people are seeking, right? Now, if you have show animals, that's a totally different ballgame, but I'm talking true production animals. People aren't walking in there and saying, I have a 10,000 head feedlot and I want all of them to have shiny coats. What can you give me, right? Like, it's just not gonna happen. So within pet food, you need to sell an ingredient because of its features and its attributes, right? So sorghum, could it be a superfood, right? Could that be sorghum's ticket into pet food? So what is a superfood? There really is no set definition for superfood, just like there's no set definition for a premium dog food. It's kind of what you make it, right? But when we think about superfoods, they're typically rich in something and they're beneficial to you or your animal or both, right? So a lot of times they're nutrient dense. They may have high levels of a functional fiber, think kale, right? They may have high levels of antioxidants, think blueberries. They may carry some sort of novel nutraceutical, right? So you think that by eating a lot of oranges, the vitamin C may help you prevent cancer, right? Like, there's a variety of things that people think of when they think of superfoods. But some of the common foods thought to be superfoods: blueberries, lentils, quinoa, salmon, kale. They don't always have to taste good to be a superfood. Typically, they don't always taste that good. So, could sorghum be a superfood? Is that possible? Is that something that the research out there will support? So, sorghum's gluten-free. It checks a box, right? It checks a marketing box. It checks maybe that's something really important for somebody on their superfood list. It's research from the sorghum checkoff supports its antioxidant rich, super rich in antioxidants. So that helps with free radicals, right, in our body. So if that's coming in with our sorghum, it's providing another benefit to us or to our animal. It's non-GMO. Again, it is a big benefit on checking the box. Now, are there some trade-offs for still being non-GMO? Yes, there are, but in our case, we're gonna say that that's a plus. It's bringing dietary fiber. So if you think back to when I was talking about kind of the overall what they're bringing a lot of carbohydrates, and that's the main focus, but they need to be bringing some dietary fiber because we're wanting stool quality, a good stool quality. When I was practicing my presentation at home, my 12-year-old asked me how many times I was going to talk about poop in front of an audience. So you can enjoy that even my 12-year-old thought it was weird. It is rich in minerals. So again, when we are formulating pet food, typically we're going to be using a vitamin and mineral pack to meet our complete and balanced. But there are companies out there that are wanting to do this in a non-traditional manner. So if you can account for those coming in from a raw material and then have to supplement less, or in some cases none, this is a huge benefit. So high quality protein, right? It's highly digestible. Again, research with the sorghum checkoff, has a lot of cat studies and dog studies that have been done since about 2017 that support that this is a highly digestible protein in pets, both dogs and cats. So it extrudes well. Again, I've kind of feel like I've beat this up a little bit, but coming off the extruder and holding that kibble together is really, really the main role that it is playing from a plant side, right? From the plant floor side. So the nutrition side likes a lot of these things above it, but there's a lot of ingredients as a nutritionist I like that when I take it to a plant floor, they tell me, go home. I will not use that because it doesn't play well at the plant, right? It doesn't extrude, it doesn't hold together. It binds water too fast or in the wrong places. There's a lot of things. So the fact that it extrudes well and processes well is a really important factor. And again, it would be considered an ancient grain. And there's a lot of you probably saying, how is an ancient grain a superfood? Well, there seems to be this marketing push on the human side as well for ancient grains. That is carried over into the pet food world, which has opened a whole nother door for sorghum and its use within pet foods. So again, and a novel ingredient. So when we think of pet food, again, variety is a huge thing, right? A lot of pet foods are chicken-based, chicken and rice-based, there may be corn-based. When your pet has an allergy, you need something unique, right? An allergy happens because they've been exposed to that protein. So you need to find a novel ingredient. At this point, sorghum can be paired with a unique protein source such as kangaroo or rabbit. It's not going to make the most economical diet, but it is going to make a novel diet, which is something that is needed in certain markets. And again, it goes back to marketing. So, is sorghum a superfood? I would say yes. I would say sorghum meets a lot of the boxes to be considered a superfood. And specifically, when you look at that in the pet food world, it checks a lot of those boxes to qualify as an ancient grain, non-GMO superfood. So again, sorghum in pet food, volume is still less than it probably could or should be. It goes back to the thought of the tannins and the negatives around palatability and the concerns around the negative nutritional factors. It's low in lysine. But we have seen through research that is out there that paired with the right protein and other carb sources and going through the extrusion process, palatability, digestibility, all of that is equal to or greater than those other grains and carb sources we've been comparing to. So when it comes to extrusion, it's got some of the same benefits of barley. It's good for expansion, it's great to bind that kibble, and it's being used for that carb fraction. If we move to lightly cooked, again, I said this is what I would say is currently the biggest growing market, specifically in North America. There's currently limited applications. I actually was not able to find a single product that currently uses sorghum that's in this category. I think this is an opportunity for research. I think this is somewhere people need to see what it looks like when you cook it and put it in this application. Need to understand if it pals well when it does not go through extrusion. So there's some information that I really think needs to be gathered to play in this market. But I think it could open a lot of doors if you can check those boxes that it is palatable, digestible, and meets the visual appeal to a consumer. Again, on the treat side, there is one paper that is done out of, I believe, K-State, and it's on the Sorghum Checkoff's website as well, that utilizes sorghum flour and making treats, but because it's gluten-free, it doesn't hold together, right? So you really have to come back and pair that with functional proteins, like an egg, or you need to be using another flour that has some functionality. There are some other ingredients that you can add that provide functionality. I mean, obviously gluten-free bread is out there, so there's ways to get there. Typically, pet parents, as they like to refer to themselves as, don't want to see ingredients that they don't understand. So the more you can do that with real ingredients versus chemically named ingredients, the better off you are. Another issue is sorghum flour being readily available. There's just not the demand for sorghum flour, so it's a lot harder to source. You can source sorghum, but sourcing sorghum flour it's not impossible, but it is a little more challenging. So supplements, and when I talk supplements, the supplement market within North America is also huge. It's soft chews, gumdrop looking treats that are delivering maybe glucosamine and chondroitin if your dog has a hip or joint issue, or might be delivering DHA and EPA because you really want this shiny coat. So you're delivering something extra, right? That also can come in a liquid form. They come in a variety, gummies. You can buy your dog a gummy vitamin if you would like to get your dog a gummy vitamin. So it's currently not used there, but it really could potentially be used if you can find enough sorghum flour as a source of antioxidants, right? So there is some functionality that I think could be used on the supplement side, and you can take the benefits of. So if we kind of group barley and sorghum back together and talk about inclusion rates, both of them are being used very similarly, right? They're used for that carb content. They are helping to bind that kibble together. So they're bringing the fiber into the diet. They're allowing for that kibble expansion off the extruder. And they're just, again, binding everything up and together. So typically, you're going to see them around the 25% inclusion rate, right? This is not a hard, fast rule. Some are higher, some are lower. It really depends on how many other sources of carbs are being used in that diet. But typically, 25% is kind of where we see these play, right? If we're naming something with barley or with sorghum, you're probably seeing it at some of these levels. So at that 25% inclusion rate, both sorghum and barley are proven to not have negative impacts on palatability or digestibility, and they both have acceptable stool quality scores. So anybody keeping track of the number of times I talked about poop, there's another tally. So both of these make great options for pet food formulations. And depending on diet design, one or both could be a great addition. So if we're looking for that weight management or diabetic food, we might choose to use both of these, and they would play really, really well to help your dog or cat feel full for a really long time. So overall, I want to just kind of end with an overall pet food summary. And we joke, and I hope it's not a joke, that this is kind of a recession-proof industry. Right now in the US, we're seeing inflation, interest rates are going up, trying to bring that inflation down. It seems like they're kind of maybe starting to get that in check, but everybody's still worried about falling into a true recession. It has been the pet food industry's general theme that when times get tough, the pet food industry grows, right? So go back to those pandemic pets. People decide that they need a companion, and they choose that to be a pet. So again, the emerging markets, think back to that global slide that I showed of the United States, those are growing. They're increasing the demand, and they're increasing the demand for high quality pet food. So as that increase in disposable income continues to happen, the demand for pet food continues to grow. The increase in forms. I think people don't always fully appreciate the number of forms. I talked about dry, lightly cooked. We could group canned into that. Treats and supplements, but we didn't talk about doggy ice cream. I mean, I formulated doggy ice cream. We didn't talk about doggy popsicles, right? So if you're camping or out and about and you want to throw some freezer pops in for your dog, you can do that. There's liquid supplements, there's gummies, there are so many forms. So pretty much if you can walk into the store and buy it for yourself, there's probably somebody working on it in the pet food industry to provide it to our dogs. And that's really becoming the case because of the humanization. It's the way we want our dog to literally be like us, right? We want them to lay on our couch. We want them to eat off a plate. We want them to eat food that looks like our food. All of that is causing the growth of this pet food industry. The one thing we are not immune to is supply chain challenges. We are struggling with the increased price of raw materials, as are all the other industries. We're struggling with availability of certain ingredients. I said earlier that once you're in a pet food bag, you're in for a fair while, right? With that said, when you can't find that ingredient, pea protein, for example, right now, has been super hard to come by. Potato protein, super hard to come by. So the price is continuing to go up. Eggs, many pet foods are utilizing eggs, and finding a spray-dried egg that is economical is nearly impossible. When you can go to the grocery store and pay $6 for a dozen eggs, there's not a lot of people breaking them and sending them to the pet food industry. So those supply chain challenges are real, and they're things that, from a formulation standpoint, are hard to overcome because each one of these ingredients is in there bringing something specific to the party. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you guys might have about about barley, sorghum, pet food as a whole.
Are there pets, or what specifications for pets would you use for tannines in sorghum? Again, what would be your suggestion for that?
So There is no limit on tannins in pet food. Most of the varieties grown within the United States now have little to no tannin content anymore. So it's still, if you go back to Dr. Google, tannins is still one of the big things that show up, but they are nearly not present in the white and the red forms of sorghum that are grown in the United States. And the small amount that may be present still is typically degraded through the extrusion process, and so there is little to no concern about them in the finished product.
Hi, Lisa. Great presentation. I have a question. So in pet food, for example, there are limits for heavy metals, for biogenic amines, and all these things. Are there any regulations or for the anti-nutritional factors, or even if not regulations, but at least a guideline that the industry uses?
There's really not a guideline per se for the anti-nutritional factors. It's the reason that the more research has been done and needs to be done to prove out the digestibility and in both dogs and cats. So on the sorghum side, those values are really coming out, and it's proving out that through extrusion specifically, the anti-nutritional factors become a non-factor, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So it's why, though, as you put sorghum into these other forms, that same research needs to be done to assure we're not carrying that over to a different form where it's not processed as harsh, if you will, for the way that extrusion happens.
Excelente.
Quick question, Lisa. I have seen data where the amino acid requirements for different breeds of dogs seem to be less in lysine, less than, for example, stipulated by AFCO, and presumably because, well, they may need to consider variation in ingredient, and so maybe the recommendation is higher, but the actual requirement can be lower. And maybe in Latin America or in other countries may not be bound to AFCO as guidelines. So is it putting a lower requirement beneficial when considering alternative feed ingredients like sorghum, or does it help to balance the ration if I don't push so much higher requirements? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Absolutely. The nutritional requirements of AFCO are known to be conservative at best, right? There's definitely some that are higher. So typically on a high sorghum containing diet, you may actually add lysine as an ingredient, right? Supplemental. That way you don't really have to worry about marrying it up with the right other ingredients, although it can be balanced using the right combination of ingredients. So it actually becomes a way to eliminate an ingredient off the ingredient panel if you have a lower requirement. So absolutely, yes, it would be beneficial.
¿Ninguna otra pregunta?
Are there any other questions? Well, no other questions, so thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa.